right, everyone. And we are now we are now live. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our 11th podcast. I can't believe we're already on 11. I am Quentin Anderson and the co-founder of Eagle 3D Streaming and the host for today's podcast, Real-Time Talk with Eagle 3D Streaming. Today, we have a very, very special guest, my friend Cesar Fragachan, who is currently with Zaha Hadid Architects. Cesar is a leading expert in computational design, currently working in the Computational and Design Group, also known as CODE, at Zaha Hadid Architects. He received a master's degree in Architecture and Urbanism from the Architectural Association Design Research Laboratory, AADRL, and he also has an MBA. So this guy has pretty much done it all. Cesar has taught courses and workshops around the world in computational design, game technologies within architecture, and digital fabrication. And it is our extreme pleasure to welcome him to today's show. Cesar, how are you doing today?
Very much.
Awesome. So we'll go ahead and get rolling. And there's a little bit of a latency thing, but I'm sure it will settle. And Cesar, I don't know if you can still hear me, but oh, did we lose him? It looks like we lost Cesar. Yeah, so I don't know if it was mine or yours or what, but thank you for joining again. We will see if we can get this going again. So, all right, here we go. Um, And Cesar, I don't know if you caught it, but we just introduced you, and thank you very, very much for being on today's show. Just to get started, to understand a little bit more about your background, can you walk us through, the master's in computational design, your MBA, or sort of what led you to explore those two fields?
Absolutely. Thank you, Quentin. So very early on, after finishing my grad school, undergrad school, actually in Venezuela, I started working on a practice on an office in architecture. I soon started to realize that there were a lot of inefficiencies in general how projects were being made. So I started to also get a little bit more excited about computational design. I decided to do an MBA just to start my own practice, and maybe do something like business oriented around architecture and design. And so I got really fascinated while doing my MBA with all the possibilities that could trigger. Making projects more efficient, workflows more efficient. Like even connecting some sort of integrating vertically the construction chain. So it's something that really felt a bit of a challenge at that point. So I started researching and learning a little bit on workflows, very, from high level procedures in Grasshopper to then saying, you know what, I want to really specialize it. The situation in Venezuela was not great politically and economically at the time. So I said, okay, I'm going to start, aiming for the best specializations that I can do in computational design, digital fabrication. So I came to London back in 2017, started the DRL, as you will said, and then got fascinated about game technologies and how we can really, put into a program like the mindset or the algorithm of an architect and let people, potentially, just come up with their own ideas, but within a constrained set of rules that would allow some sort of coherency within the design solution. Because as architects, you don't want to enable everyone to do anything like they want, like a normal game, say like in Sims, for example. But really make something professional out of it. So while doing that and also connecting and exploring with digital fabrication, integrating workflows from giving to the user the possibility to customize their homes, and then connecting that to a backend that you could assume sort of what nowadays is kind of on the discussion of Industry 4.0. So that was kind of a little bit more the excitement around. So after finishing the master, I had the opportunity just to come to Zaha Hadid Architects. My tutor Shaji Bhushan at school is also the head of the Computational Design Group, where I'm currently working, and also Patrick Schumacher. Was quite interested about all these ideas. And then just about I started in the office, there was just a project that came in Honduras, in Roatan, about residential buildings, and then they were kind of developing a model a little bit, tech savvy, but they really wanted to innovate in a way of not only how people live in the island and they can, for digital nomads to move there, but also on regulation and permits, that they actually have some sort of flexibility to work with that. So when they saw these ideas of configuring, properties and letting the user to play with them, they got quite also excited about it. So we started getting into the endeavor, the challenge of creating a configurator for them to play out the set of rules. So that's kind of like leading everything to this notion of user participation, user journey, and testing things digitally. So that turned out to be quite interesting, how people started configuring their own properties, putting their ad, not just like in the unit types, but how would they want to place a unit within a stack or within a cluster. So once we had a lot of data collection out of it, and basically we were allowed to do this also pixel stream thanks to Eagle 3D at this point. And so yeah, it was very insightful, and I asked designers just to get that feedback early on from potential customers or end buyers is quite valuable, just to make the buildings better.
Mm. So, and I remember this project well. And for any of those who are not familiar, if you Google Zaha Hadid Unreal Engine, you will see the spotlight piece on this project. It was super, super cool. So for the viewers that are listening, there was a development being created in Honduras that Zaha was designing. Is that a accurate statement? And then you took it a step further by enabling the future residents of that development to customize their home through a browser before ever stepping foot or before this development was even finished. Was that one of the things that was done on this project?
Yeah, exactly. So we had to work at very early stages, because the way that we wanted to systematize this, we need to also have first the feel of the place. So it came up for a couple of months of really nailing down the design and the kit of parts. So in order to then deploy it modularly, so everything is quite computational in a way of voxel based and prefabricated components. So we just kind of, once we had the actual feel, and then we encoded the rules of how the parts come together, just so we could guarantee that we're gonna always have a highly curated design solution for the site. Because I mean, one of the curious thing about this development is that they have a lot of, I mean, it's a big island and they have a lot of land. So we were shifting between different sites quite often. So it's not easy, just to, if we're going to make a project and then you have already a lot of constraints into one site, but having to replicate this across different sites and very fast, then that's when a logic of computational design and breaking apart, discretizing the site in in a grid of voxels turned out quite interesting. So it's kind of like it's been like it was an ongoing process of feedback between design and system, and then how the system can, once tested with the users, feedback again the design. So it's this continuous feedback loop just to make the system more robust and better.
Yeah, and I want to touch on the voxels a little bit more because that piece was interesting. We had a question come in from the audience though. They said, "Does this project help users customize their house design on a browser?" So I guess they're just asking to confirm that.
Yes, exactly.
And so, how are you able to customize a home design on a browser? I guess what?
Yeah. So we established a procedure, I mean, a set of gameplays of actions that once you get into the platform, let's call it, in the browser. So one of the things that, for example, if for you that are familiar with the Unreal Engine, you need to have a powerful machine to run or like an application, especially if it's ray trace, you might need like an RTX card. So
Hmm.
the great thing about streaming this online on the web is that you take off all the hardware, let's say limitations of on the client side. So that's what we found useful, just to host this on the cloud, Pixel with three Eagle 3, streaming. And then once we got that to the customers, they were able to play at their homes with tablets, with their own computers. All the front end was done as normal web development, but the application, the one that is hosted on the server, handles all the requests and process. So by the game actions, they could select the cluster where they would like to pick. Then they can select the unit type. We have 4 unit types, ranging between different areas and ratios. Once they have that, they can select further add-ons, let's say balcony sizes, roof types, if they wanted to have a palapa on the top or a flat roof. And also we curated a set of layouts per unit, so around 3-4 layouts that they could select with. So a user could not move a little bit a wall, they could just select between 2 types of curated layouts. Say that you value more a public space that rather than a private space, or having more beds, or you want to have more living rooms. So those kind of options we always put available for the user. So once this kind of leads to basically a tree of decisions that can have multiple outcomes per unit. So it was very putting everything in a step-by-step basis, like the same way that you would maybe configure a watch or a car.
Mm.
The similar logic to do that with housing.
Mm. Yeah, and I noticed one piece was the voxels, which, and correct me if I'm wrong, is basically the entire development was broken down into squares or blocks or voxels. And then once we have it, basically a grid of blocks, then I can choose to make my unit take up 6 of those blocks or 3 of those blocks. And so the overall design, because we have everything modular, will actually depend on what the residents decide is best for them. Is that kind of
That's
how
an
the
accurate,
voxels?
yes, that's an accurate point.
And how common is that approach in designing, or did this strategy that you developed help enable that sort of design methodology?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because that turned out, I mean, the first time that we deployed it, we on the beta release, we gave the users a blank canvas every time they logged in. So it's saying, if you have all these voxels, these possible solutions, where would you put the unit? So once you register all the data, then we start seeing like clusters of where people put the most units. So
Okay.
based on that feedback, we said, okay, now let's redo the system based on these considerations. Not only based on the data that we got, but we also did at some point what we called a white glove service. So at that point, I was kind of driving the sales base with a developer salesperson, but it was driving, let's say, like the configurator. So asking them questions, what would you put here and not on the other side, just to get that feedback early on how to position the units. Then that informed the way that we deploy the next iteration of system and the next iteration of the rules that we can establish.
Got it. Yeah. So we're not just, or we're capturing data. And once that data is captured, we're using it to inform next versions or
Exactly.
iterations. And that's another super, super cool thing about doing this approach is all that data is fairly accessible, and can be captured and used if you choose to. So,
Yeah.
and some people watching may wonder is this a metaverse? Are we in the architectural metaverse by doing this, or is it not like that at all?
Well, funny enough, I mean, when we were doing it, I think 2 years ago, the metaverse, it was not like a hype at the moment.
Yep.
But I mean, definitely at this point, it has led to metaverse like conversations. Actually, when we first were doing the system, one of the ideas, and basically the one that I was when I was doing my project at school, it was like a multiplayer, multi-collaborative uh, play. So at that point, we tested out with 80 players at the same time, just negotiating spaces. So there was quite an interesting academic exercise just to see, okay, if I put my unit to sell, who would buy it? Or if I expand my unit and then I have to bid the location of the other, how that, it kind of unfolds into a game theory framework of negotiations. So that's kind of like a next step that we would like to also test in this platform, saying, okay, now let's allow multiple people at asynchronous times just to bid as well, because maybe the first person selected the top, like the best part in the development, but then like the last person blocked the view of that first person. So how then like you enable this sort of continuous forces of bidding against each other and then negotiating spaces until you reach an equilibrium. And that, for metaverse purposes, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other interesting approach about the metaverse, I mean, it's not just doing something in the metaverse and leaving it there, but it's how do we inform our designs afterwards, let people test it, not wait until it's built and to spend millions of dollars just building everything and say, oh, like this would have been great if we have done it differently. But we could potentially test that virtually, no cost associated, and then iterating on it would be less expensive and we can make buildings or real buildings better.
Wow. Yeah, and the developers would probably be happy with that because if it incites or encourages bidding or multiple bidding, then
Exactly.
the
Mm-hmm.
price per square foot is probably going to go up a little.
Exactly.
Do you see it extending beyond the developer? So maybe once a unit is selected and customized, submitting like a bill of materials to the manufacturer, who then will just receive that and say, "Okay, got it. This is a new development, and this is what we need to do to build for this resident." Do you see it extending that far, or what do you think?
Absolutely. Actually, now that you mention it, I mean, there's a company now getting built in the island or circular factory, and then they are already setting up the robots just to get already all these units because they're basically made by a kit of parts. So depending on the orders that the developers are getting from their houses, this can be connected to the back end of that factory. So it's really integrating everything into this idea of the industry 4.0 in construction. So, I mean, we're slowly kind of getting towards that level, and it's definitely very exciting. Have multiple stakeholders, and not only manufacturers. You have people that are going to be the end users. You have the developers. You could even have property managers, right? Like if this lives in a digital twin, how can like rental pools be managed in such a platform? You could have even governments associated, setting up the rules of how much this can be built. So it could become a platform, in the future where multiple stakeholders could, collaborate and inform the decisions between one another.
Yeah, and it's so exciting just to see this new in or this not new in industry, but new, I guess, version. Like you said, construction 4.0 emerging, and there's so many different technologies and things coming together. Where do you see you, or where's your interest most in everything that's kind of going on? What excites you, or what gets you, you know, um, energetic about the future?
About the future, yeah, I mean, I'm really keen on allowing, in a sense, democratizing some sort of the design,
Hmm.
because once you can, as an architect, we usually work for less than, like the 1% of the population, right? And then, but if you could really encode the rules for letting people, to have great design at their homes, and you could set the rules for that. So, it's kind of like you put your mind as a designer into a platform where people can have a design assist tool and a better experience when buying and customizing and designing their own properties. Um, and then having, of course, like when we start reducing and having workflows more efficient, it for me, it doesn't make sense that a project takes months or years just before, you kind of kick off the ground just to start building it. And then even in the building process, it takes a lot of time. But once we could start really integrating the industry into a workflow where instead of pushing a one fit all solution, as it currently stands, like just trying to make things cheap and everything the same for everyone, like
Hmm.
a formula that works and then push it into the market. What happens is it's, like taking it from the lean manufacturing part, and it's more the pool that you get from the market saying, oh, I want this. So it's mass customizing, but then really, being able to adjust very quickly, because once you have computational design in the process, then you can really automate all the drawings, all the technical, let's say, variables. There's of course a leap within the zoning regulations that I think that might take a little while to just get through. Um, but once we can, streamline process of customizing, having the project ready, and then, connect this to offsite factories, and, developing projects cheaper in less time, so you could allow people to have better homes, cheaper homes, and something that fits them, as opposed to just trying to, to fit yourself into an already, one fit all solution, uh,
Yeah.
in the market.
Yeah, and better homes because then if you
Better homes,
build,
exactly.
10,000 homes and then you can machine learn what is the best way to build a home, then all of a sudden you're starting to optimize builds and
Exactly.
making it
Absolutely. I mean, this is just like this step that you need to also get data. I mean, to train a machine learning model, you need good data, right? And then having that data fed first from, like, let's say a hard-coded algorithm that, generates, a solution, but then gets tested with actual users. And then, all the data collection serves to train machine learning models, for the future,
well,
making even projects faster.
well. Yeah, and so we have things like BIM, we have Revit, we have CAD softwares. Where do you see Unreal Engine sort of fitting in with all of this? Or what do you think?
Yes, I mean, I think Unreal, I'd like to think it as there's like a set of parts, right? Like at the end, all of these are tools, and then like the what we need to focus is more on the customer experience, and developing better buildings. So
Hmm.
whatever can achieve that, on Unreal is amazing that we can really quickly, have something already, set, and then, test it against configurations, and then you see real time render. You don't need to go back and render every perspective. You can do walkthroughs and everything's going to be amazing, pretty much a real life. So the more accurate you get to a real life experience in the digital world, then the faster you're gonna you're gonna check about issues in the design, and then you can iterate it quicker, make the designs better. So I think that's what's really, and of course, like the multi deploying this as an app that people can use it, and have that in a game engine as a framework. It's quite powerful. Again, it's not maybe we're not going to have all the drawings from the Unreal, right? But then you could serialize all the data of all the configurations, and like bring it back to him, having it in CAD, rationalizing a little bit further. So it's not that machines are necessarily going to take our like our jobs as architects in that sense, right? Like we'll still need to put what architects are best at, and that's about creating, creativity, designing, and not about just, like pulling a line, or, moving everything and drawing again, trimming lines, that could take hours. And then it's just a mechanical work that I would argue that, like most architects, that's not the part that they enjoy the most. So it's just putting, architects to work on the creative side of things, and yeah, and letting also like the computational design part connect to a backend system that can automate the rest of the mechanical work.
Mm. And when we think about computational design and it being adopted by the industry, do you see one set or group that could really help with its adoption? Is it the architects, or is it the developers? Is it the manufacturers? It could be everyone. Or how do you see sort of adoption of all this technology happening in the industry?
I mean, the construction industry, unfortunately, has been one of there's a lot of inertia to change and, to adopt technology. So there has been little disruption, I would say, in the construction history. So, for example, the case of even Caterra, in the States, like I thought that they were, paced for a great, hypothesis of trying to offset all the manufacturing, automating all the other processes, but they had let's call it a management issue, and then it didn't come quite through. I guess with technology, the problem is nowadays is that in general, construction comes at a high cost and a high risk. So not many people are willing to take the risk for a change once they have their workflows already, set in a traditional manner. But I'm pretty sure, as with anything, like once there gets like the early adopters, that want to test and really make buildings better, because I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people like that. We've connected with a lot of people like this mindset. So once we get more people into that framework of trying to make our buildings better, more efficient, less expensive, environmentally friendly, once we kind of steer to that side, it will be, it's a slow process. It's not that it's going to be one, like a massive breakthrough overnight, as maybe like some of the technology that we are used to disrupting industries as that has happened. It might take a little bit more, but I guess, I mean, it will turn out to make buildings better in essence, and that experience for the end user. So
Yeah.
that's kind of my effort goes in that on that line.
Yes. Well, my hat goes off to you for being an early adopter and pushing this technology. It's clear that this is something that will benefit the world. So thank you very much, for everything. We are already at the end of the half hour. Cesar, I want to thank you again for taking the time to be on our show. It was very insightful just hearing your opinions and perspectives on everything real-time configurators in the architectural space. If people would like to connect with you, should they find you on LinkedIn or?
Yeah, LinkedIn is perfect.
Sure. Okay. So LinkedIn, for anyone who would potentially like to connect with Cesar. And thank you all for joining today's show. This is Quentin Anderson with Real Time Streaming with Eagle 3D Streaming, and we will see you on the next show. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Cesar.
Thank you so much, Quentin.
And we are off.